everyone, and welcome to the Able Voices podcast. I'm Dr. Rhoda Bernard, founding managing director of the Berkeley Institute for Accessible Arts Education, and I am proud to present this podcast featuring disabled artists and arts educators. We are inviting artists with disabilities to be guest hosts for the Able Voices podcast. Today's guest host is installation artist and disability advocate Alexis Neumann. Alexis is a Pacific Northwest installation artist using light, biomedical imagery, copper and iridescent, transparent, and reflective materials to draw attention to the complexities of the human experience while engaging disability studies, intersectionality, theology, and cultural studies. She lives with multiple invisible illnesses, including Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and mental illness, and is currently based in Portland, Oregon. Her work focuses on and celebrates interconnectedness, intricacy, and balance within the body through her use of neural and biological systems, and explores resiliency and the metaphysical through sound, light, vibration, and materials.
Hi, I am Alexis Neumann, and I am the guest host for the Able Voices podcast. The next few episodes, I am an artist, am very passionate about exploring the field of disability art and creating opportunities for others who are dealing with similar things that I am. And I work mostly as an installation artist and also as an art and culture worker. I have a Master's of Fine Arts from the Pacific Northwest College of Art in Visual Art and a Master's in Critical Studies from the Pacific Northwest College of Art as well. And I am here today with Marie Connor, who is an arts leader and artist in Portland, Oregon. She holds a Master's in Education and Post-Secondary Educational Leadership and Policy from Portland State University, where she was also the director of the Littman and White Galleries, as well as a Master's of Fine Arts and Visual Studies from Pacific Northwest College of Art. Marie had a residential gallery project called Tethered Cord in the basement of her home, where she featured emerging contemporary artists and art students to give them the opportunity to gain experience responding to non-traditional gallery spaces. Marie and I are actually working on a project right now exploring disability arts, which I'm hoping we can get to talk about a bit later. It has been wonderful getting to know her and finding out how we best collaborate. But first, I want to ask about you, Marie. I'd like to start off. How did you get your start as an artist, and how did you get to where you are today?
Oh, hello. I'm Marie Connor, and thank you for the lovely introduction. It's interesting. I have done art for as long as I can remember. It's just always been something that I've been drawn to, but I'm a Gen Xer, and I think at the time there was never really this idea that being an artist was a career choice or a path. And I was a pastry chef for 15 years. And then I was able-bodied most of my life, and I had a disability come on when I was 37. And then when I was 40, I found out that it was actually spina bifida. It was a birth defect. And I was a rare hidden form of it. And so I kind of had to reassess my whole life. And it had a lot to do with, changing career. And then I got divorced and all this stuff happened. And so I went to school. I didn't have a college degree before that, and I started college when I was 40. And I went to school for nonfiction writing. I've always been a writer, which plays a big part of my practice now. And I just knew that I was just not going to make it if I wasn't in an art class. And so I started taking sculpture classes because I'd always been kind of a sculptor, 3D artist. And I came from a background of a lot of poverty, and I didn't even know what contemporary art was. I actually didn't even know what it was, literally. And I never grew up going to museums. I didn't grow up around arts and culture. And so when I went to PSU, and when I was there, I just got really lucky because here in Portland, some of the same educators that teach at the elite art school also teach at the public state school. And it really like fueled my passion for arts access for everyone, no matter what you can afford.
That's
And
great.
one year, like before I even finished that first year, I knew that I was going to do a double minor in sculpture and writing. And I did. And like at the end of it, I was running a gallery, helping run Littman and White, which are professional contemporary art galleries run by students at PSU, one of the oldest galleries of its type in the United States. We showed William Popel there, and a lot of the art educators that are here. Like, it was a really incredible experience. And not just working with artists, but to also see how art is affected by the higher ed institution environment. And I ended up deciding during that I was either going to go forward and do an MFA in art or an MFA in writing. But I knew that I wanted to do a master's in higher ed because I watched all of these art professors I know, like, go straight from art school to like learning to run programs without the background to do that. And I knew that I wanted to be an arts leader in one way or the other. And then basically through these projects, like, I kind of learned that I have a passion for outsider art and third wave feminism. And that's kind of like who I am and who I've always been. And to see how art can facilitate not just what's happening in our culture, but also our own lived experience. And my undergrad was kind of, I like to say my undergrad was about figuring out how to make art. And when I went and did my master's, it was about figuring out why, and it really changed, my perspective on how I saw myself as an artist, how I saw myself interacting with community. And the higher ed degree kind of helped me figure out, like, oh, you got to find the gap and fill it, which is what I'm doing now, so.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for telling us about how your education has played such a central role in you being an artist, and how that has created an environment that has fostered not only your own arts education, but your passion for education of other artists. As a scholar and artist, I know you are also passionate about the field of disability arts, and in particular, disability aesthetics. Disability aesthetics.
Disability athletics are pretty cool too, but they're not my jam.
Could you tell us more about this field and what draws you to it?
Yeah, well, okay. So when I was in my higher ed degree, there was a class. I very clearly remember that one of our requirements was the sociology of education, which in the United States, which I thought was great because having a good understanding of like what founded our elite universities or the way our university systems go, or like online universities and different aspects of things was really nice. But like, I've got this incredible book, right? And it's thick, and it talks about marginalized groups and how to teach or how to understand diverse adult learners. And in it, there's rightfully so, like large chapters on, queer students, on students of color, on, Native students, like different groups. But there was literally like 3 paragraphs on academic ableism and ableism in institutions. And that like blew me away, but only because I had been disabled for like 6 or 7 years and hadn't actually even heard the term ableism. Like, I didn't even understand that I was like maybe ableist most of my life, like most of us are, a little bit. We live in a very ableist society. Then I didn't quite understand, that I was dealing with internalized ableism in the way that I was presenting myself to the world, the fear of telling my own story because I didn't think anybody wanted to hear it, those things. So I went directly from that program into my MFA. They actually overlapped by a week. So like I just was in school for about a decade. I went into, and just to interject, that was partially because I live with disabilities. It's very hard to be employed. And kind of had to live off student loans for a decade, Yeah. That's the real of it. When I went to PNCA, I got there and the very first term started actually doing research on disability in the arts. was like when my research started. That was in 2017.
I
And
see.
literally from the moment I got there, I was just checking out every book there was on it, which, spoiler alert, there's not a lot. and and there's been more developed since I started my research. But I came across this scholar, Tobin Siebers, who wrote a book called Disability Aesthetics, and it's all breaking down the theory. And then there's Rosemary Garland Thompson, who also wrote a lot in this field. But Tobin Siebers is the only one who's written a book about it. And when I found it, I was just like, all these light bulbs started going off, because we can talk about disability and disability in the arts and representation for artists all day long. But what really got me was that I was entering a world that was not made for me, even my art world, which normally, like, freaks like me, the art world's where we belong. It's great. but ultimately, I was showing my work in spaces where I couldn't even see it from my mobility device. I was going to galleries where I was always edging around the outside because I felt like there wasn't space for me in that space. I was afraid to take up space. The standards of beauty that the art world is kind of built upon, scale, hanging distance for art, like all of these things, is, the more research I did, is ultimately misogynistic and racist. And so I was really interested in this concept of disability aesthetics, which is the idea that if we break down those standards of beauty and look at the non-normative body, and spoiler alert that everybody is a non-normative body, we can then build a new and elevated standard of what we think beauty is. So the disabled body, the fat body, the colored body, the black body, the whatever, is elevating our standards of beauty. If we look at it that way, it doesn't just have to be the white, able-bodied male, or perfect female form, right? So that's kind of where I came from, because I'm a curvy, short Irish woman in a wheelchair. So, like, I don't fit into any of those standards. But I still consider myself beautiful, and many people I see out in the world beautiful that other people would see as broken. And I feel like it's really important to help able-bodied or other cultural institutions understand that we can all come together in a different way if we see each other for who we truly are, which, like, part of what I'm starting now is arts accessibility consulting work, because I feel like that is really lacking, at least here. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I have always also found disability aesthetics to be really interesting, because it questions everything that I would think art should look at when it looks at the human body. And it calls into question why we believe certain things and why we have seen representations of very specific bodies and not other bodies as well. You also have a lot of projects that have been exploring disability arts. Do you have, I know one of your projects, the Capitol Crawl, is one of my favorites. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that project and how it came to be?
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm really interested in kind of outsider arts, and I've been involved with and interested in the community of, like, grassroots arts groups and organizations. And a friend of mine from school that was in my program was running a space called Third Room, and she called it for a while Liminal Space. And it was, a space she accessed here in town, and I kind of, like, I had the opportunity to show there. She offered me a show. But the crux of the situation was the elevator in the building has never worked during the entire time she's had the lease there. And there were, like, literally 50 stairs, right?
Wow.
And I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user now. At the time, I was using a mobility device and a cane. And when I had the opportunity to show in the space, it was really my first solo show outside of either my own gallery or school. And I had been thinking a lot about this movement, this political movement that happened that many people in the disability community already know about, the Capitol Crawl. It was like 1991, I want to say. And it's a group of disability advocates, one of the leaders of which was Judy Heumann, which we all know, most people know about her, and I don't have enough time to go into it if you don't. Look it up. But they literally were trying to fight for legislation to just have equal rights, and a whole bunch of people with disabilities in wheelchairs like pulled themselves out of their wheelchairs, the youngest one being 13 years old, and pulled themselves on their arms up the stairs of the Capitol building because they couldn't even access it, right? So they were making a political point. And so for the show that I did some work upstairs. I have this GoPro series that I run. So I was running a GoPro series video that I call my extreme sports series, which is really just me walking or rolling through the world, and it's like the ground. But for me, that's extreme sports, right? Like the first video was being in Italy, and I hooked the GoPro to my cane, and you just see my feet and the cane the whole time. And I ran that video, and I had some sculptures where I used like broken mobility devices, and I did some drawings of my MRIs that were in the windows. It was a collection of things. But then I did a performance where for an hour, I basically very slowly walked up the stairs with a tray of cookies and some lemon water because I wanted people to feel welcome to have this discourse with me. And then I'd get up a few stairs, and then I'd lay my cane down. It would slide to the bottom, and I'd go back down and get it, and purposely taking time. And even though only about 6 people showed up to that show because I didn't have as good an understanding of like how to get the word out as I do now, the 6 people that did show up some of them are arts leaders here in town. And it really created like discussion. And even Kalaya, who runs the space, was like, we've never had this kind of discourse in this space. And it started to affect me to think about how simple gestures, the art was one thing, but like the activation of the space and the conversation was like the real work for me. And it started to inspire how I could approach my work. It led to a series of little teeny performances that would just, to me were normal movements or actions like, putting a cane just out of reach of my chair and then struggling to get it and letting it fall on the ground and then sitting on the floor and pounding it on the floor and like just how it would just level a room of people. And I realized that like our actions, no matter whether we're disabled or not, can actually, by showing, and I'm stumbling over my words here, but there's a whole path by other artists who've shown that their actions of their bodies, like there's maintenance work, there's work that like Janine Anthony has done with her body. Like there's a background and a history for doing this. I'm just pulling it into the disabled art space because I love the idea of, the little funny nod to the history that art is. And actually some of the work I'm creating for the show we're working on together is a bit of a, humorous nod to some pop culture and art stuff. And I think that there's a way to have the conversation, but also you've got to make people want to have the conversation, hence the trade cookies or the humor, and I have seen people working in the arts that are telling marginalized stories, and more need to be told. But I also have been in situations where I don't feel like I was the intended audience or that they even cared whether I heard what they were saying. And I think for allyship, it's important for there to be room for other people who don't live within that reality or don't have that lived experience to want to feel welcomed into the conversation.
Yes.
Because how else do we make change if only a little teeny section, like, if you're just talking to the people who already know it's hard. And then the other aspect of that is like, I have been a mentor to some kids and teenagers in the past. I used to work at at a charter school of teenagers. And I see that living in this world is very hard for them, especially with the pandemic. I've seen so much anxiety rise for kids who just don't even like, it's hard enough for adults to know how to grapple with what's happening in the world.
Mhm.
But by having these public interventions, these conversations out in the world, my goal is that like that these young artists or these young disabled people coming out into the world can feel like they're seen, like there's a place for them, like there's a voice that they can have.
Hmm.
And so that's like my main motivation for doing that. I think you didn't ask that, but I told you anyway.
No, that is one of the questions, so that's great. Yeah, as we are talking about this project that we're exploring within disability arts, the show that we're curating, Willing and Able, is the title of the show. How has the curation process and being able to have discourse and conversation, like with the central motivation of education within disability arts, how has that affected your curation of the show?
Well, it's been interesting because I think that like many artists, I've been kind of working in a vacuum. I graduated my master's right before my MFA, right before the pandemic. And I
Hmm.
think that like for me, there's been a lot of researching and working on these things kind of by myself. And
Hmm.
now that, because you brought me into this project, I'm very excited that you did because like meeting you and the other artists involved and even just the call for art and seeing how many people are out there and are interested in these subjects and are interested in creating this kind of community, for one, was really affirming. Um,
Hmm.
but also, suddenly I'm full of ideas and excited by talking, because the point of the project is it's a generative project, right? We didn't ask anybody to bring work to the table. We asked them to come with an open mind and an open heart and ready to have discussion and generate new work based on the discourse that we have, right? And I
Hmm.
think that it's been really effective to hear how other people's experience has been in this space, and what they need, and also just see like the high quality of art practice that's out there in a time where much of society during the pandemic basically said they don't care about disabled people.
Hmm.
They don't care about our access or even whether we live, or maybe they care about whether we're taking up resources. And I'm not saying that that's all people or even the majority of people, but a big group,
Yes.
big group. And
Yeah.
that's been really defeating for a lot of people, and it's so my curatorial concepts have grown a lot, and my passion for this has like really been fueled by this project. um, and to be fair, it'll get more of that because right now we're in the process of creating work for the show, which will open in the beginning of October. But then we're going to be
Mhm.
doing artist talks and workshop series and panel discussion that's public facing. And I think that's actually going to generate so much more community discussion around this,
Mhm.
and we'll be able to answer questions for people who don't 100% understand or hear about other people's experiences, in the world. And I'm really excited by that. And it's kind of a lead into like I've been trying for 4 years to start a nonprofit based on disability aesthetics. And once again, working in a vacuum. Sometimes with disabilities, you just can't leave your house as often as other people, or it takes so much more energy or spoons to like do
Mhm.
the extra things beyond the things you have to do just to pay your rent. And
Mhm.
so having this project going and getting support by PICA and the Precipice Fund, like seeing that the community out there does care about this, has been really affirming for me, knowing that I'm going in the right path, as well
Mhm.
as creating the connections to actually make things happen that need to happen. Because when you're working in a vacuum, you can't always do that. So
Yeah, I do feel like that is the case for a lot of artists, but especially artists with disabilities working within a vacuum, and finding the community has been, for me, so central to my own art practice. it's completely reimagined how I look at myself and how I look at art and my place in the world. And it's interesting because most of the community aspects of that I've had within disability arts have been online because of the past or the past and current pandemic, and how that has created a lot of resilience, but also we've had to be really innovative about the ways that we are creating community,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
how that furthers just the field of disability arts in general, which is exciting.
Yeah. It's you said that, and I agree, because I guess in a way the pandemic, which I guess we're in an endemic now, but the pandemic really forced me to reach out in an online community, but it's a benefit to do that. And I think we
Mhm.
get really busy in our daily lives, like, or dealing with our chronic pain or whatever, and just to like be connected, because I live by myself, or I did after a year into the pandemic. My daughter went to Chicago, and I I needed that community. And um, by doing that, and not just like, yes, I've gotten on the forums, we've all get on the forums of just people with disabilities talking about their experience, or following people on TikTok or whatever. But
Mhm.
to actually, it actually made me think about what I want for my future and how to make that happen. And it ended up where I created this like connection to a lot of disability arts uh, culture projects, or organizations. And,
Mhm.
guess what? There's not that many. And
Mhm.
as far as the Disability Aesthetics Institute, that doesn't exist anywhere, like anywhere. And
Mhm.
that's why I'm like, oh, well, there's the gap, because there are disability arts organizations. Many of them are focused around movement, dance, and all of that, which is great. And, and we also need those organizations for visual artists and all
Mhm.
of those things. And, the thing that really struck me is how many people that I do know, that because I helped create a disabled student advocacy group at PNCA after I graduated, because I'm
Mhm.
part of the alumni board of directors for the school. And so I
Mhm.
try to engage students, and the thing about it is, there's a small community there, but often there's a misstep on how to move forward, or how to move out of that. And there's just not enough. There's not scholarships or other things for disabled students. They often don't get the accommodations they need to extend deadlines when they need them. They don't, there's so much that it's already uh, um, independent art education already is kind of like a little elitist in the way that it like wants to weed people out. And so it's even
Mhm.
harder if you have other things that you're having to overcome in your lived experience. And there's no reason not to make those accommodations. Like, there's no reason to. And making connections to other disabled arts organizations across the world. The UK has a couple of really good ones.
Mhm.
I start to see maybe how Portland doesn't always support its disabled arts in the way that it could, and so
Mhm.
that there's room for improvement, in my opinion.
Mhm.
I'm connected to like 3 organizations in Chicago. They've kind of got it down, but like I think that, as I see, before the pandemic, about 20% of our population, maybe 20 to 25% of the U.S. population, was you know, self identified as having a disability. And
Mhm.
now they're looking at it being closer to 35 with long COVID.
Yeah.
And I feel like a third of the population is enough to maybe increase awareness of the situation. I don't know.
Yeah. It is very significant.
Yeah, you know. But the arts are interesting because they don't always support the people who need it the most. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
still, women who are over half of the population now are still like fighting to have the recognition that, I think about, people coming out of surrealism and Hilma F. Klint and like other, like, it's so hard for women artists. So women with disabilities or women artists with disabilities and women of color or trans artists with disabilities and artists of color, like once you start stacking up the identities that aren't considered the mainstream, the more marginalized people get.
Mm-hmm.
So like all we can do, like if we have a voice, like I have a voice, so if I can use it to advocate for people who don't always,
Yeah.
I think that's what we need to do for each other, I guess.
Yeah. I guess moving towards the end, I'm wrapping up with the question of, is there any advice that you'd give other disabled artists or other people exploring this in their work?
Yeah, get therapy. And be gentle with yourself, I guess, really what it comes down to. Like, I think we should be in a society where everybody normalizes therapy. It helps you deal with, because you can't change, like I can't change the fact that when I leave my house in my wheelchair, 6 people are going to run to catch the door for me, even if I don't need it, or ask me if they can have a ride, or tell me I need to get help or whatever. I can't change that, right? I can just stay home, but I'm not interested in that.
No.
But ultimately, like, being gentle with myself and not taking things too personally. And this just goes in general of living with a disability or with, mental health stuff, any of those things, anxiety. But I think as a disabled artist, I think just part of that being gentle with yourself is allowing yourself to cross things off the list that you don't have the energy to do. Also, just not allowing people to tell you shouldn't do your work. And I hit that the first time when it didn't have anything to do with my disability as a memoir writer. And people are like, oh, nobody wants to hear about this thing that you're talking about. And I'm like, well, one person out there does. And that's all that matters. Right?
Yeah.
I had an amazing writing professor who told us that. They were like, if there's one person who thinks that your story connects with their story and that they don't feel alone, you've done it enough. And you've done enough. Well, it doesn't sell the book, but still. but ultimately, like, don't let other people tell you not to make the work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, make the work.
Yeah, your voice is important, and especially within this community, there are going to be others who appreciate and relate to what you're doing. And even if it feels like you're working in a vacuum, creating the discussion and creating the knowledge around this lived experience is crucial.
Yeah. And I mean, part of that goes with, like, who are you making the work for? If you're making work for your audience, a lot of times that work isn't actually authentic to what you need. And you have to ask yourself if you would make the work whether anybody saw it or not. And
That's an interesting
I think that helps get to that, because I have definitely been the person who is like, I got to make things I can sell. I got to do this. I don't know if anybody wants that weird sculpture I made with a broken walker, but ultimately there's a balance, especially in working in a contemporary art field where, you have to make a living, but you also, which is why I'm in arts leadership, because I'm passionate about that. And that leaves me the room to make whatever work that tells my story,
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and being here. And thank you to the Able Voices podcast for hosting us and letting me guest host this episode. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Able Voices is a production of the Berkeley Institute for Accessible Arts Education, led by me, Dr. Rhoda Bernard, the founding managing director. It is produced by Daniel Martinez del Campo. The intro music is by Kai Levin, and our closing song is by Sebastian Batista. Kai and Sebastian are students in the arts education programs at the Berkeley Institute for Accessible Arts Education. If you would like to learn more about our work, find us online at berkeley.edu/BIAAE or email us at BIAAE@berkeley, that's LEE.edu.